Good day, guys. Welcome to Santa Capricia episode number 3. And today's episode we are doing some good old-fashioned building, extending the city to the south. So the plan really is I need to begin work on this big industrial port area. But before I get to that part, I need to sort of fill out the industry further to the north between what I've already done at the moment and where the port will be. But that area is pretty big, as you can see, and it's going to be a combination of industrial, commercial, turning into what the actual port itself will be. So there'll be container terminal, maybe some kind of car import area with lots and lots of vehicles. There will be lots of freight, as well as one of the main infrastructure sections of the city. So this is where you're going to have the main interstate connection going from the north of downtown out of the city, which is what I'm working on here, just laying this down. There'll also be quite a complicated network of railway lines. You'll have suburban rail lines with stations, and also a freight or a couple of freight lines. Now at the moment I'm not sure exactly where they're going. I need to sort of work out a bit of a plan in terms of the position of where those lines are going to be accessing and how they're accessing the different areas. So it's a bit of a logistical headache, as well as having all these freeways diving through the middle and a load of power lines as well. The power lines are not necessary, to be honest, but I just like the visual appearance of them. I like the look of them, and I think it's going to fit in with this area nicely. So there is a lot of kind of infrastructure work to, in effect, build first of all before I can get to grips with the actual buildings themselves. Which is why I'm starting with the freeway. And I wasn't going to build a junction this close to North Kennet Junction, which is just a little, a couple of 100 meters, I suppose, to the north of here. It is quite close to that junction, and I know with City Skylines there's this, it's not a rule as such, but the general way of organising these freeways is to keep the junctions relatively sparse and quite a big gap between, because the temptation is to put lots of them down, but sometimes that can actually cause more traffic issues for your city than if you keep the freeway junctions more spread further apart more. So I'm not really going with that. I'm not really adopting that concept with this, because this junction's pretty close, but I want to get another junction in here if I can, because I think it'll be a useful access point for the southern portion of North Kennet. Because although that area at the moment isn't particularly busy, I mean there's hardly any traffic at all in the city, which is probably because there's hardly anybody actually living in the city. I haven't really built any houses for anybody yet. But I think eventually that will become pretty busy, so I want to make sure I've got the infrastructure there, as well as just having a cool junction. I mean, this is not a, I'm not a expert by any stretch of the imagination with building these junctions. As you can see, I'm sort of messing about with it, trying to get the thing working in the right position so that the curves and the radiuses all work. But at the end of the day, it's not a beautiful looking achievement, that junction, but it looks all right. So hopefully it fits in with the city. But it's quite like the way you got all these transmission, these high tension transmission lines everywhere. Just sort of, I mean, that's probably not the best place to build a gas station directly underneath a load of high tension power lines, but it looks quite good there. So this area is what I'm doing here now with this area is modelling or putting down a sort of rough I guess, a rough plan of where the freeway is going to go, because it's going to run due south of the current position and then kind of bend at 90 degrees and then run across the kind of along the coast there. So that's the plan. Whether it actually stays like that, I don't know. It will also go due east and cross over the river. And then what I'm doing here is just suggesting where there might be a bridge. But, until I actually start putting down, finished roads, then all of this is still kind of a little bit up in the air. I'm trying to avoid being too regimented, too fixed in terms of the position of stuff. Because the other thing I really want to do, and I think I'm going to have to do, in order to get this city looking realistic, I really do need to refer to some real world geography, some actual cities, and look at how, particularly these sort of areas are organised, because they can be very, very confusing. And when you start looking on Google Maps, for example, at different industrial areas, particularly in the States, you have a really huge amount of different stuff going on. You've got railways, motorways, lots of different types of industry, and all of that somehow coalesces into a sort of whole. But that's quite tricky to get, or to make look accurate or realistic. I think in this game you can just end up with a load of warehouses, and I don't really want to do that. I actually want to have a combination of stuff. I want to have some sort of shopping malls and bigger sort of freight warehouses and stores, as well as your smaller warehouses, for example, something like this. So it's going to be quite hard, I think, to get something that looks realistic without referring to real world geography. And it's not about copying, it's purely about using it as inspiration, or using it as a jumping off point, and then modelling your city based loosely around real world places. And it can be anywhere, really. It's somewhere that just gives you a bit of inspiration. You think, yeah, I quite like that looks cool, I'm going to sort of use that as an idea. And then you'll find, I think, that your city will improve if you do it like that, because you're more basing it on reality. And it doesn't have to be a straightforward copy. It's never going to be a straightforward copy. So this little area here that I'm doing is just going to be a copy and paste job, making a little kind of warehouse district here, and then I've copied it from another one I've made there and just rotated it into position. So you can easily do a copy and paste and get something built reasonably quickly without having to lay down individual buildings all the time. If you do copy and paste and move it about, put a bit of different detailing in here and there. So for example, there I had a gap. I had to make a gap because you've got the transmission towers there coming in. So then I put a car park in just to give it, at least to make it look like there's some kind of planning going on there. But also it just breaks up it looking like a copied building, which is what it is. It is a copy, but it just breaks it up a little bit. So I'm all for kind of doing that. It's cheating it a bit, but at the end of the day you kind of have to, because it's going to take so long otherwise, if you're building every single detail from scratch. With the Move It mod, which is a fantastic mod. I mean, I just could not do this game. I could not play this game without Move It. That mod in itself is the single most important mod for me, because it gives me complete flexibility, and allows me to position everything exactly where I want it, because I'm a bit of a stickler. I like to be in complete control, and that's why I kind of gave up playing City Skylines to begin with, because I just found it was too restrictive. You're trying to build a road, for example, trying to build a freeway junction was just a nightmare, because you couldn't drag the on ramp and the off ramp. You couldn't drag them around. You effectively you had to just stick with how the game was, how the game wanted you to place it, and it was very much restrictive in terms of its freedom. So now with the Move It mod and all the other mods, it gives a complete sandbox, a complete control now, which is what we've got. But yeah, so I think with what we're doing here, it's all about just placing down different details. Again, these are asset editor created assets, which I've just bought in. Little kind of yards and areas for the warehouse with some boxes and things like that. All those little details which just go and make it look that much more realistic, without just getting crazy in terms of adding lots and lots of props, which I'm trying to limit. I would say that the next episode, definitely the next episode, I'm going to be starting to play. I'm going to start to play with PO, which is procedural objects mod, and PO is absolutely, from what I can tell. I mean, I've only just dived into it, but from what I can tell, it's up there with the Move It mod in terms of game-changing experience. That I think is going to be an absolute godsend for the City Skylines community in terms of what we can create now. As I say, I've only just started to look at it. Literally the other day I downloaded it, and from what I can see, it looks brilliant. It really does, and it's almost turning the game into 3D software rather than a game, which is what I've been wanting to get for years. I mean, before I played this game, I used to build 3D cities in using 3D software, and I mean, it's painstaking beyond belief, and it takes so long, particularly because I like the details. And now, with City Skylines, you've got the detail. You've got all these kind of like assets and things, so you can very quickly create details, which in a 3D software would take you months to do. What I've already achieved with this game is by far more detailed than what I spent about 2 years of my life doing, which was building a 3D city. So, and now with the PO come out, that again is just going to make life a lot more interesting for everybody involved, I think, and also for me in terms of what I can do, what I can create. It opens up a lot of possibilities. So just getting back to this area here, you can see it's a bit of a combination of small warehouses and kind of like industrial units, factories and complexes and things. This little area here I got a bit carried away on. I downloaded some graffiti decals, and they're rather good actually. You can get some pretty cool looking effects with them. It's a little bit fiddly just to get them on or lined up on the wall, but the end result, I think, when you see it, looks really good. So I've just been experimenting, putting a few of these graffiti decals on the wall, making this sort of run-down area, which you often get with these industrial neighbourhoods. That's something else I want to try and do, is a real run-down area. I'm not sure exactly whereabouts it's going to be, but I think it might be fairly close to this part of town, and it'll be graffiti everywhere, and abandoned factories, old warehouses, empty car lots, and I guess a few sort of maybe shotgun houses, those sort of things, with just a few little houses and lots of empty wasteland and stuff, burnt out cars, etc. So quite keen to do something like that, maybe this sort of area. I'm not entirely sure where, but it could almost be a transition zone, that from the main kind of port, industrial port area, and where we are at the moment. But I need to just look at options in terms of where that sort of neighbourhood would likely be, because often those sort of neighbourhoods are areas where there used to be lots of factories and factories have now shut down and people have lost their jobs and the land value just plummets, and yeah, you end up with this sort of urban wastelands, I suppose. And there's a few cities in the States that have got these sort of places, unfortunately, but they're interesting to model because the fact that they are so kind of this sort of urban decay. I quite like it. I know I shouldn't do, but I just quite like seeing sort of rundown areas, that sort of vibe. And as I say, Santa Capricia is going to be a proper kind of working city. It's got its really nice areas. Going to have plenty of those, don't worry. But it's also going to have its real kind of like rough, working class, poorer neighbourhoods. And at this stage, that's probably what I'm going to be modelling sooner rather than later. I can't see me moving to the posh neighbourhoods quite yet. I'm too much involved with this sort of area at the moment. But this is kind of a large freight sort of depot place with these sort of access hatching there, with access kind of like areas there for trucks to come in and unload, pick up cargo and so forth. So I did these just big warehouses. I just wanted to put down some bigger scale buildings just to break up the kind of monotony of the smaller buildings. And what you'll also see me start to do in a minute is, I think maybe I recorded it or maybe I didn't, is look at how the railway line there can maybe connect to some of these buildings, because when you look particularly on Google Maps, you can often see that you've got these railway connections going to these depots and places. Quite often complicated railway lines and things. Yeah, I mean, I didn't get any of that on the video there, but there will be some railway connections to that sort of area there. So I'm going to be focusing, I guess, a little bit more on the railways in up and coming episodes. So this last area now is just this is a shopping mall, and I've got loads and loads of models, assets from the workshop of shopping malls, but I have not done any yet. In fact, the city has been pretty much just all about warehouses. I'm a little bit obsessed with warehouses, but I thought I would do a shopping mall, but I'll create my own one from just a vanilla. It's like a small shopping mall, I suppose. The vanilla building there, just joined together to make a larger building. But I just wanted to see if I could create something myself, and I planted it in there, and I spent ages trying to get the angles and everything right with this. Far too long really for what it was, but I think the end result turned out okay. I think the problem I found was those car parks are not 90 degrees to one another. I think it's like 100 degrees or something, so the angle's slightly off because of the way the building is, which meant when I started putting down the car parking spaces, I had a bit of a mare trying to make them fit properly because of the angles, and the end result was slightly odd, but I think it kind of works all right. I mean, again, these car parks are part and parcel of the States, and quite important to put down a lot of these, but I'm going to try and avoid getting too carried away with car parks, because as I say, this one just took me about an hour to build, which luckily this video is not going to show the entire build, because we would literally be here for an hour looking at this thing. But even speeded up, I think it took too long. So I've edited it down a bit, but it was an absolute nightmare trying to get this thing to fit properly, and I spent ages tweaking it. And you can see there I've got this weird situation with the parking lines on the corners there, and I was trying to work out how best to fit them. And what I ended up doing was putting some sort of like planters and things there, and then using some lines, just decal lines, to sort of fill in some of the gaps to make it almost look like it's being designed that way rather than it being accidentally made that way, which is what it was. A lot of the time I don't really plan these things out. I just go ahead and merrily put down a building and then try and make everything fit around the building, and often doesn't fit. So again, it's all about tweaking and nudging, pushing, moving, and yeah, again, move it mod. Only way to go with this. And again, breaking up some of the cement, concrete, pavement there. Although I quite like the theme that I've got, I do find the kind of pavement texture is a little bland, and I do have to break that up every so often. Here I'm just using a cobble decal just to give it a little bit of detail and give it a bit of interest, because I think if it's a shopping mall, you probably have something a bit more a bit nicer than just a kind of bland concrete paving. There's nothing wrong with it, it's great for the industrial areas, but it's just quite nice to add some details. And I'm doing a bit of cheating here, because obviously this building is a copied building, and I'm having to try and disguise some of the repetitive logos and things on the building by planting some logos I've got from the workshop there just over the top. I think they're from the workshop. They might even be vanilla, actually, thinking about it. Again, it just gives it more of a kind of feel like it's a shopping mall. And again, these little glass canopies, which I'm trying to line up here, not very successfully, I have to say, they look quite good, I think. Just again, give it a sense of God, that's bugging me. I'm going to have to sort that out later. I can see they're not lined up at all. That's the sort of thing that's going to really annoy me. The last thing to do really is just the sort of decorative, well, I say decorative, but things like signage and planting and so on and so forth, just to give it a final polish. But I think the end result, as I say, came out quite well. I might have to put some car props in there, because I'm not sure how many cars I'm going to get in that shopping mall. It is a working car park, so hopefully it'll fill up, but you can see at the moment the city is pretty bare. So anyway, that is the end of that was quick. That was the end of this episode. So goodbye, and don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.